These cities were once inhabited by millions, but are now abandoned and deteriorating. But what are their stories? From a town that was hit by something like a biblical plague, to mining towns, to infamous nuclear disaster zones, on this episode of Built a Billion, we present to you the largest abandoned cities in the world, Part 3. And stay till the end, because you won't believe the bizarre circumstances behind the last abandoned city on our list. And if you love to hear about all the mega projects of the world, please subscribe to the channel and help us reach our goal of 500 subscribers. It'll really help the channel out. Ruby, Arizona. The town of Ruby, Arizona is a real-life example of the Old West romanticized in Hollywood movies. Ruby was founded as a mining town in the 1870s and a place where people came to get rich quick. But the town had become infamous for another reason: two ominous double homicides known as the Ruby Murders. Bandits came to town and murdered the locals on 3 separate occasions, which began one of the largest manhunts in the American Southwest. This was enough to push out the 1,200 residents of Ruby, and the town was officially abandoned in 1940. But the town is now home to 100,000 Mexican bats, so maybe Batman has a cave underground there somewhere? Pyramiden. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, much of its presence still lingered on, one among them being the city of Pyramiden. This abandoned city was a mining village in its prime and sits on an island only accessible by sea or snowmobile. Plus, it sits in the middle of the Arctic Circle of Norway, and nobody has time for that. Founded in the early 1900s by the Swedes, the city was sold to the Soviets by 1927, and for the next 70 years was mined for its coal deposits. Before you know it, tall apartment buildings went up for the workers. These buildings formed a circle that surrounded a statue of Vladimir Lenin in the middle. It gets no more evil villain-like than that. But the city shut down in 1990 due to the depletion of the coal, and all the residents were gone before you could say Y2K. Pripyat, Ukraine. Pripyat, unlike other cities in this list, was abandoned due to a nuclear disaster. On April 26, 1986, a tragic meltdown occurred inside Reactor 4 at Chernobyl's nuclear power plant, causing flames and radioactive material to cover the air above Pripyat. Pripyat was a nearby city built to house the scientists and workers, and within 36 hours, they were all evacuated. And in order to ensure no one returned, the Soviet government put in place a 29-kilometer exclusion zone around the city and the power plant. Consequently, many former inhabitants have had dire health problems due to their exposure to the radioactivity, despite only being exposed for 2 days. But astonishingly, there are still about 400 people who refuse to leave to this day. Even though the city will not be habitable for centuries, the government has opened it up for short-term tourist visits at $100 to $500 per pop. I sincerely hope that you, dear viewer, would never do something as incredibly stupid as this. Kalmanskap, Namibia. If it's one thing we've learned, it's that mining towns all end up abandoned at some point. Located in the southwestern section of Namibia, Kalmanskap was founded in 1908 after a railway worker found a large diamond laying about. This of course led to a diamond mining rush. German laborers flooded in to carve up the area and built a hospital, ballroom, theater, and casino. In addition, this town created the first X-ray in the southern hemisphere and the first tram in Africa. But sadly for the town, a much larger mine was found in 1928, 260 kilometers south of Kalmanskap, and by World War II, Kalmanskap was extremely depleted. So by 1956, the town became completely abandoned like the unpopular girl at prom. Kalmanskap is now covered in knee-deep high sand. Bombay Beach. Bombay Beach sits 40 miles away from anything. In the early 1900s, much of the Colorado River was diverted to a desert area in California, and waterfront properties popped up immediately on what became known as the Salton Sea. and Bombay Beach became the new trendy place to live. But with this notoriety came farmers and their pesticides, which killed all of the aquatic organisms. So, dead fish washed up on the shore and basically creeped everyone out. Tourist businesses plummeted, and people stopped vacationing at the land of the dead fish. Today, Bombay Beach is a shell of the resort town it once was. The skeletal remains of the fish are still scattered around, and the now brown Salton Sea reeks of death. So this is one beach you can cross off your summer bucket list. Kelso. Kelso in San Bernardino, California, was built in 1905 and housed 2,000 people that worked anywhere from the mines to the railroads to the iron processing plants. But the main work was the locomotive train maintenance facilities. But the new diesel-powered engines for trains made the steam engine obsolete, making those workers useless. People left the city in droves in search of new work. The town's economy collapsed, and by 1985, the abandoned town had 0 people in its limits. But here's a free date idea. Why not take your sweetheart to visit an old abandoned city if you're in the area? Vorkuta, Russia. During Stalin's reign over the Soviet Union, his Gulag labor camps gained attention for being a literal hell on earth. Unforgiving cold temperatures made anyone who was sentenced here immediately regret what landed them in the camp. But word got out about the coal in the area, and people from all over the country flocked to the region to find high-paying jobs in coal. Vorkuta was the small town built to accommodate the new workers, but it closed down in 1991 when the Soviet Union fell. And just like with all other mining towns, the people left with the jobs. Many of the buildings are still abandoned. However, today, 50,000 people still live in Vorkuta. That's a big difference though when comparing it to the 1 million people that lived there before. Many people would love to leave this place behind, but they can't afford to live anywhere else, and no one wants to buy their homes in that freezing climate. Kayaköy, Turkey. In the early 1900s, Kayaköy was a humble city full of mostly craftsmen, but in 1923, the Greco-Turkish War forced the residents out of their homes. But it wasn't due to fighting. The reason was much more bizarre than that. The two opposing countries agreed to a population exchange, where some Greeks would go live in Turkey and vice versa, in order to snuff out religious diversity and force one religion. How that works beats me. But today, there are 350 homes and 2 Greek Orthodox churches from that time still standing. But everything is surely deteriorating due to the elements. What do you think about this list of the largest abandoned cities in the world? Parts 1 and 2 should be up on the screen. So click that video on the screen to watch something you haven't seen. And thanks for visiting Built a Billion.